Hello and welcome to today's edition of Extraordinary Outcomes. I'm Shubhanjan Sarkar, your host and founder of PitchLink, the buyer-seller engagement platform. In our show today, we speak with Tibor Shanto, Chief Value Officer and Principal at Renboard Sales Solutions Incorporated. First up is our news roundup from the world of sales, SaaS and startups in NS3, and Dr. Pawan Agarwal on the customer focus of the Mumbai Dabbawalas. Let's dive right in. Here is the news in NS3.
In this bulletin, contact center software market to reach 72.04 billion by 2027. Matillion closes 100 million round to make data useful. Epic reveals realistic Metahuman 3D character creator. Survey finds COVID has changed consumers' expectations. Allied Market Research valued the global contact center software market at 18.7 billion in 2019 and expects it to hit 72.04 billion by 2027, growing at a CAGR of 18.9%. The growth of omnichannel communication and CRM are the leading drivers of growth in the contact center software market. The cloud segment accounted for nearly 3/5 of the revenue in 2019 and is expected to dominate by 2027, growing at a CAGR of 20.2% throughout the forecast period. Cloud data integration platform Matillion has raised a 100 million Series D as it aims to take advantage of new large verticals shifting to the cloud. The round was led by Lightspeed Venture Partners with participation from Battery Ventures, Sapphire Ventures, Scale Venture Partners and Silicon Valley Bank's UK branch. Matillion's platform helps companies move data to large cloud warehouses and then transform the data so that it can be easily digested and deployed. Matillion now has more than 1,000 customers, including Amazon, Siemens and Accenture. Epic, creator of Unreal Engine, showed off Metahuman Creator, a character creation tool that lets creators make an infinite variety of near photorealistic digital people by mixing presets. Making realistic people, especially faces, is a challenge in the increasingly high-fidelity world of gaming. Metahuman Creator is a cloud-hosted application that lets users create human characters with extremely high levels of fidelity and detail. Epic's approach is not just to increase the quality of assets, but also to make it easy and efficient to use. A global study by SOTI has found that consumers have higher expectations of retailers due to accelerated online shopping during the pandemic. Consumers refuse to buy if returns aren't easy, shipping and delivery isn't trackable, and data security isn't given priority. The new study from Bricks to Clicks, State of Mobility in Retail 2021 report reveals that 29.5% of consumers in North America shopped with brands that could deliver goods the fastest. Nearly 57% consumers said they trust large online retailers with personal and payment data. Thank you for watching. All links are also available in the show notes. If you have news about sales, SaaS or your startup, share it with us at ns3@pitch.link. See you next time.
Meet Tibor Shanto, a sales leader for over 25 years and has been called a brilliant sales tactician. Tibor develops salespeople who understand that success in sales is about execution, everything else is just talk. Tibor has trained leading companies including Imperial Oil, Bell Canada, Business Development Bank, amongst others. His proactive prospecting program has been accredited by the Canadian Professional Sales Association. Tibor co-authored the award-winning book Shift: harness the trigger events that turn prospects into customers. He has been named in the top 30 social sales influencers in the world by Forbes.com in 2014, voted 50 most influential people in sales and lead management by Top Sales Management Association, and is a top sales and marketing blog gold medal winner from Top Sales World. Enjoy this contrarian discussion with Tibor.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope I live up to the expectations, but if nothing else, I'm sure that we'll exchange some great information and at the very least have some fun going into the holidays. So I'm glad to be here today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The common data available around B2B sales is that lead to actual closure conversion is 5%, which means if your marketing is working and gathering and handing over 100 leads, the sales teams are going and closing 5 of them. What are your thoughts on this?
I think the wonderful thing about data is as soon as you find the fact that you want to validate, you can find the data set that will do it for you. Because I could find data that shows entirely different factors and different numbers. I also think it's a question of what you measure because, you know, a lead is a commonly used phrase, and this is something general and we can get into it in various elements of sales. But, you know, people use certain words in a nudge, nudge, wink, wink way, if you're familiar with Monty Python, right? So, you know, they say lead and they assume that everybody has the same definition of what a lead is. They say prospect and they have the same definition of a prospect, and they don't. Because I've been to conferences with venture capitalists where they say that they consider a 2% conversion really good. But what they're talking about is putting in raw records into a mincer and coming out with something that they think looks like a lead based on some abstract profile that some college graduate made up, you know, in the back of a van somewhere. So I'll give you a specific example, and people can go to my YouTube channel, YouTube/sellbetter. There was about 7-8 years ago, InsightSales.com. Are you familiar with them? Great outfit, you know. And then at the same time, there was another company called Insights, as in GHT squared. I don't know if you're familiar with them as well, but also if you go to the video and the data is there, they came out with, coincidentally, within a short period of time, what is the best day of the week and best time to make cold calls, right? Now, they had polar opposites, right? One said that Tuesday was definitely the best day, and the other said Tuesday was definitely the worst day. One said before 9 and after 4 was the best. The other said between 10 and 5. I don't think either one was lying. I think they were looking at a set of data that was called from a different source, and as a result, they got different conclusions. So I don't question your data, but I think it's one set of data, not the definitive data.
So what would you say is the right data?
I think it varies. You know, I'm likely to say tens of thousands of salespeople, B2B sales professionals in prospecting. And one of the things that I make them do, and this was something that I learned from the person that trained me, so it's not original, is I make them keep track of their activities. How many dials or outbound attempts do they make? How many right person connects do they make? So we don't count receptionists, nice people, but they're not party to a sale or what have you. And then how many appointments? Like, let's be clear, committed person listening to you in a sales format. So when we count it like that, my numbers are 12, 6, and 1. But I train people who are 5, 3, and 2 because they sell a product that's in demand, right? And then I also work with people who have numbers like 20, 3 and 1 because of the type of product they sell. So I think the question or the challenge or the opportunity, depending how you look at the world, is to know what your data is, not get hung up about somebody else's data, get hung up about your own data. And, it's interesting because depending where you are, whether you're in the States or here in Canada, because I'm in Canada, I'll use the Canadian example. I'll work with a group of people and I'll ask them, if they like hockey, and which Canadian doesn't like hockey, right? So I ask them who their favorite player is, and, somebody will put up their hand, so I pick on somebody that's a bit outgoing, and I'll ask them what their player's plus minus number is. And I don't know if you know what that is, but it's a stat that hockey fans follow, right?
Sure.
And they know it down to the T. They can tell you what their plus minus is on road games, and they can tell you what their plus minus is on home games, right? And then I ask them what their stats are, and they haven't a clue. So, if you know your data, then you can align it with your quota, with your business objectives, and then you can take measurable steps to attain that quota or that goal. So the data shouldn't be driving the thing, it should be assisting the process. But I think the original question, yeah, I'll buy that 5% from that data set. I could show you another data set that's 80%, and I could show you a different data set that's 1%. So I think rather than worrying about these data sets, which are great for people like me because I could use them to validate points, individual organizations and companies should look at their data and see if it aligns with their goals.
Yeah, so I'll dig a little bit more into this.
Go for
And
it.
I get your point, absolutely. So when we are talking of benchmarking and industry standards, there is some commonality in the data that is available and commonality of definition as well. So when I'm talking to people who are in the either leading, say, I'll take SaaS as an example. That's one growing sector. A lot of people in the SaaS business, a lot of people are using SaaS and so on. People actually have pretty definite definitions of who is a prospect and who the marketing guys are going after and what is being handed down to the sales folks and what is getting handed down to the inside sales folks vis-a-vis what's getting handed down to the folks who are actually going out and meeting people and so on. So there is some amount of homogenization of the data. So it's not really so different if you take one particular industry, and conversion rates are still pretty poor. So I'll be keen to know, when you have a data set which has 80% conversion, what kind of industry and what kind of data are those?
Again, it's a question of how it's measured, and that was an extreme. But I have worked, I'll give you one specific example with financial institution, very much in demand. They're known for, capitalizing startups, not necessarily startups, but people who have established themselves, shall we say, revenue generating companies, but still relatively young and growing and so on. And they have a mandate to do that and so forth. So when they're calling up, again, their numbers were like 5, 3, and 2, right? So like they would dial 5 people, they would speak to 3 of them, they would get appointments from 2 of them, and they would generally convert because, again, of the product that they were offering and the benefit that it would bring to the people. I've also seen, people who've really established themselves, and again, in a blue collar trade in transportation and so on, their reputation is of the sort that when they speak, they're able to get appointments, right? And now I would say that the reason they could do that has less to do with data and has to do with the actual service that they deliver. Because again, I think the other reason that over relying on data is sort of questionable is that at the end of the day, buying and selling is a human experience. And as soon as you get 2 people together, you have a cesspool of subjectivity and data goes out the window, which is a good thing, right? So again, like I question some of this data from the standpoint that I've seen. I'll give you a current example. During COVID, right? I deal with a number of companies who are distributors in the same industry for the same manufacturer, right? So in theory, everything should be equal except the final point of execution by each of the distributors in their channel. One is thriving, the other is crying the blues. He has laying people off and he's about to go bankrupt. So, again, data has nothing to do with that, right? Because one's data, again, hired me for training, he's hiring salespeople. You would think COVID was a boon for him, right? The other one is going under, same industry. They were both reasonably successful, I would argue, floating with the tide, before COVID came along. So I think at one point you have to sort of bring it to the street. And that's why my tagline is, execution, everything else is just talk.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point, because if everybody executed the same way, how would that pan out? Obviously, there is a gap in leadership, and that's why some companies are more successful than the others. So it boils down to pretty much the same things that govern the rest of the success. Would you say that?
And one of the challenges with SaaS is, there's a lot of me too, not me too in the current sort of,
Yeah, I know.
that sense, but in the previous, before it was appropriated by causes, when you go to the club, you want to have the same suit and the same shoes and the same telephone that all the guys at the club have, right? And if you're on the girl side of the club, you want to have whatever all the girls in the club have. So if we're going to be honest about SaaS, there's a certain element of fashion as opposed to practicality to it.
The fact is that most of the products in the world are Me Too products. So the point is that most of us are in commodity business. It doesn't matter what we are selling. It's an airline or it's a travel industry, whatever. I mean, we are pretty much giving what the other guy is giving, right? So either you are changing the definition by saying, hey, I am a sales guy who will only charge you when I get you some sales. I'm not going to ask for any other money. I'm only going to charge you based on my success that I bring you and so on. So unless you have the ability to take that kind of a plunge, you are pretty much doing the same thing the rest of the industry is doing. Most salespeople would opt for a salary plus commission structure because that's what they know and that's what is being sort of pushed as the right way of dealing with it and so on. So the point I'm trying to make is, how do you differentiate there when you are essentially, most of us are in a commodity business? And I mean, exactly the point that you are making, that one is going under, the other is doing well.
Part of it is how you view the market, and that's where it becomes very individual, right? So the data is good. It'll help you if you have an idea or if you have a plan, right? If you don't have a plan, having data is just nice, right? So, I think the question is how you execute, how you put all this into practice. Again, the same thing that you were saying from the point of view that people tend to do the same thing. Like there's a lot of fashion, Me Tooism type of thing. So if all of a sudden everybody does something, look at the rise of sales enablement, like what a concept. They should really call themselves sales disablement, right? Because if you look at what they bring to the mix, it's really nothing. If you look at the last 5 years based on CSO Insights data, the Miller Hyman shop, slightly more than half of people have made their quota over the last 5 years, which is about the time that sales enablement has made its rise. So maybe it's about the time that we slay sales disablement and allow salespeople to actually sell as opposed to gather statistics, which is what sales disablement gets them to do. But I really do think it comes down to how you engage with that company, how you engage with the opportunity, how you engage with the individual person. And, if you look at SaaS, and I'll be controversial, most of them are one-trick ponies. I mean, with the exception of a few of the large established outfits, if you look at most of the ones that are on the back of the rhino picking away at the parasites, they're one-trick ponies, right? And generally, the next generation of the larger product incorporates that trick into it. So they go out there with a singular message. I remember talking to a VP of sales at a SaaS company who wanted me to train his team. And I talked about how I help people uncover, what the objectives of the companies are and how they're planning to achieve it. He said, I don't care. We solve one pain. If they have it, we solve it. And if we don't, we don't. So in an environment like that, yeah, you could sell because, you basically, did I shoot? Did I hit someone? But that's not selling. That's more like, as somebody once at Salesforce described it to me, whack-a-mole, right? That's not selling. That's taking orders on steroids,
Do you see or do you sense that the buyer fundamentally has changed, and pretty much like how internet has disintermediated lots of industries, the buying process itself has been disintermediated? Do you see that shift?
I definitely see that it's shifted, but I think, again, we sort of need to explore that in some ways, right? Because, I remember doing a presentation around this whole question, because when we talk about what's changed, it's not a binary thing, right? There's a number of things that have changed and a number of things that haven't changed. So it's a question of what you're facing at the moment in order to move the sale forward, right? So the way I like to describe it, and if anybody's interested, they can reach out, and I'm happy to send them the slides on this. Rather than looking at sales as being this one sort of monolithic, circle, look at it as being three concentric circles, right? And if you go back to the start of the last decade, when the internet, flushed out and really took off and as a business thing, it is true that all of a sudden buyers had a lot of more access to information. Myself, in '98, I bought 2 cars on the web without talking to a dealer. It was a great experience. But my next car I went and bought through a dealer, right? Because I experienced it and, made a choice. But I understand, and, what Daniel Pink made a big issue out of this whole notion of information parity. Yes, Buyers now had access to information. Do they have access to knowledge? Some. Do they have access to insight? Fewer. Do they have access to actionable insight? Very few, right? So, yeah, some salespeople whose job was to deliver brochures, they were sort of finished when brochures can fly on their own. But if that buyer is looking for knowledge and insight and so forth, they need a subject matter expert, which is what I suggest to most salespeople they should be, which are subject matter experts. So back to your question. If we look at the outer circle, where the tools are, right, where like almost every day there's a new tool. You and I have talked about tools. I think you're introducing a tool, right? So like every day there's something new that's useful to salespeople in order to be able to engage, communicate, and message their audience, select their audience, do all the things that we need to do as salespeople, right? So has that changed? Dramatically, right? Like every month there's a new generation of useful, practical tools that, are out there, SaaS, bolted onto Salesforce, Dynamics, the whole bit, right? So if you look at the sales world like that, I agree with you. It's changed a lot, right? You look at the next circle, and that's how people begin to use those tools, right? So now the buyers got smart as to how to keep salespeople away, right? So they got a bunch of tools that they could use. Salespeople got smart as to how to sort of balance that out. Hence, everybody talks about their stack, right? So they go back to the club in the locker room and they all compare how big their stacks are, right? So, so you've got that element of it going, right? So again, so when you look at that, yeah, there's a lot of action, there's a lot of back and forth, but we're just doing a dance that we've been doing forever and ever, just using new tools. But the idea is, again, buyers trying to hide really what they're trying to do, salesperson trying to find out. We're just using modern tools, so it looks like it's different. But the dance, it's pretty much the same. Now you get into the inner circle, the one that counts, which is why people buy, right? Why does an executive make the decision to go out and inquire about potentially making a purchase, right? Why does somebody, that infamous all sales starts the search online, right? Why did that person go to the keyboard and put that search into Google? That why has not changed since Adam and Eve bought the apple from the serpent. The why is the key. The why they make that purchase is the key, and that has not changed. How you get to that why and how you nurture that why and how you open it up in order to get a sale, in order to drive revenue, all that has changed. But if you could focus on the why and think about how you use the tools and how you use the techniques and how you use the data to be able to answer that person's why, that's the key to sales. And all these other tools that are coming out every 5 minutes are trying to compensate for the fact that most salespeople don't want to do the work that it takes to get to the why.
The why is very intrinsic to the buyer, right? So I have a need, or my organization has a need. It really is not aligned to any salesperson or any vendor organization. It doesn't matter. It can be multiple vendors who will satisfy that why together. It may be one, it may be three, we don't know. When we have the why, we have the why. The first important thing is that I've discovered my why and I've started looking around that what will answer that why.
Actually, no. The best salesperson is the one that helps the customer discover the buy and creates that bind.
This assumes, this statement you just made, assumes that the salesperson will understand the buyer's needs better than the buyer does themselves.
100%. Subject matter expert.
Yeah, so why would somebody go to a vendor subject matter expert and not go to an independent subject matter expert? Because you would not want to go to somebody who has a vested interest in selling that product as a solution vis-a-vis somebody who will advise me and charge me for the advice.
I agree. And I think that that's one of the challenges or opportunities for salespeople, because I think that the reason that the initial, logically speaking, if we took emotion and everything else out of it, right? The logical person to call is the best salesperson in the industry, because they're probably not just the best informed about the product, but again, the reason that I think I bring value is I'm a conduit to best practices. Right? Mm-hmm. That individual VP of sales that I speak to today will know more about their company, their sale than I will ever want to. Sure. But in terms of widely speaking, how best practices unfold across B2B sales across the globe, which is my client base, right? I know more than that dude will ever know, right? Now, I'm not saying that to brag, but I'm saying that as a result, I'm a resource. And if salespeople would gear themselves to be a resource for their community of buyers, then they could lead with the why. Because again, most of the people that I sell to did not wake up thinking they wanted to buy sales training, but they did have some business objectives. And I aligned my message with those objectives. And as a result, I was able to spur their why. Now, they may have already been halfway through their why, they may have already had some questions about it. But it's my job as a salesperson, as a real salesperson, not as an order taker or a SaaS guy, is to actually do know more and to ask the kind of questions that makes the customer think about where they are, where they want to be, and so on. You know, people ask me what sales book they should get their salespeople, and rather than recommending my own, I always say start with a 10-day MBA, because you're in a business process, right? Like salespeople walk around saying sales process. What a bunch of morons. I mean, you know, they're part of the process for like 5 minutes, right? It's a business process that they're part of, right?
Yeah.
So learn how business processes unfold, and you'll be able to start them, sell them, and close them.
You are talking of one vendor which has a person like this that you just described. But the buyer has access to 5 different vendors where all those places there are experts sitting, who are all
They're going to gravitate to the one that's going to ask them the questions that make them think. And again, so I agree with you that most salespeople just sort of go through the motions. You know, they enhance the brochure, and as soon as we come out with, you know, those 3D things like they're doing with Tupac Shakur now, salespeople will be eliminated because we'll be able to send in holographs, right? So not talking about those salespeople, right? We're talking about people who can actually call somebody out of the blue, have a business conversation, and then within a few months generate revenue by selling a product that if you would have asked the person that got the call the day they got the call, they would have said they're not looking to buy. And, you know, I'll give you, I don't know where you're located at the moment, but, you know, the busiest highway in my city is the Don Valley. It's always jammed up 24/7, you know, 365, right? So you go on there, you know, you're going to have time to think, right? So I always tell salespeople, what's that person thinking about in that car at that moment? Forget your product. You think they're sitting there talking about your product? You think they're sitting there thinking about how they could take your copier and do this, and how your trucks are shinier, and how your software is faster? They're not thinking about any of those things. So when you call them up and tell them that I do this, that, and the other, they go, I don't care. That's not what I was thinking about, right? But if you can call them up as a subject matter expert and talk to them about the scenarios that you know they've been thinking about on their way to work. And the reason that you know it is that you've done your work, right? You're subject matter expert. You know, to your point earlier, do you really think a CFO is that different in thinking in a industrial company in New York versus, say, a services company in California? The CFO themselves, the process that they go through to make sure that the company is financially sound, that they're able to, you know, financially invest in their future, they're able to achieve all their goals. Do you really think that, dramatically speaking, there's that much difference between the thought process of a CFO for a manufacturer in New York versus a services company in California?
Suppose it's not. Carry on with your thought.
So you have most of the conversation covered before you even start if you've done your pre-work. Now, you do have to tailor it to the industry. You do have to tailor it to the specifics, but I would argue that there's greater overlap in many instances than people think. But the problem most of the time is they start thinking through the product perspective as opposed to thinking through the objective perspective.
The buyer's objective.
No, the sellers think more around product, but, you know, most customers, defining the product is the very last element of it, and by that time
Absolutely,
it's too late,
I agree.
right?
Yeah.
So if you can get in there early, right, and formulate their thinking, right? So I love people who tell me they're not thinking about doing anything for the next 12 months because they got 12 months to formulate their thinking, right? Now everybody goes, oh, 12 months is too far away. But if you got enough of those in your pipeline, you really don't have to worry about it because it's always 12 months from some point, right?
Yeah.
So, but this is the thing, and this is why we go back to whack-a-mole, because, you know, it's like want to buy, and they find somebody that says yes, and they think that they've done something good.
It's a very good point, because most of the time people do not understand that a lot of things have happened in the buyer's organization. They didn't just, to your point, nobody wakes up one morning and starts searching for a solution. Okay, this is my why. Let me find out the answer to this why. They're not doing it. This has been in the making for many months, right? So I agree with you that if you always have a pipeline which is 12 months away, which is great, because then you know that's a cycle you can drive and you have enough time to work with these people. So how do you get in early? What is the way? Cold calling cannot be the way.
You make the call, like you have an idea of who you potentially could serve well, who potentially has a margin that makes sense for you. And then you call them and you talk to them. But what you talk to them about is the key difference. And let's take it back to your first question. If I'm deliberate in my plan and I target specific people and I understand that I'm looking not just for people who are ready to buy now, but I'm willing to engage with people who are willing to buy 18 months from now because I know that I need to become their emotional favorite over time, and I can do things that by the time they switch from passively looking to actively looking, I'm going to be their emotional favorite, right? Now, if you counted those, your conversion rates would be a lot higher, but most people don't count those, right? Because they want that guy that's ready to buy this quarter. Buy now, buy now.
Low
buy
hanging
now, right?
fruit, right?
Yeah, fruit being the operative word. But, so it's a question of knowing what you want to look after. So I closed the deal this year that I initially spoke to that VP in 2015, right? Now, I didn't get it then, but I planted the seeds that allowed me to come back and so forth and so on. I just closed a deal with one of the largest companies in Canada. Initially, I spoke to that VP about 6 years ago, right? But, you get enough of those and, so those are some of the examples of the long things. I engaged, we talked, they understood where I'm coming from. Again, not everybody's ready to buy now, but what you want to make sure is that when they are ready to buy, they're thinking of you, right? And that takes a bit of work. That takes, and that's the other thing that a lot of salespeople don't like is work. Sometimes you mentioned earlier, that it's hard to find salespeople who want to work without a salary and all that. And sometimes when I do training, I make a suggestion of things that I do on a regular basis. And they look at me like I'm from Mars or something. And then I realize that they have a base. So if they don't do that, they still get to eat. If I don't do it, I don't eat. I like to eat.
How do you engage over a long period? Because it not only takes patience. Imagine you are not the master of your own destiny like you are, but you are answerable to a VP of sales who is answerable to a whatever of sales and who is answerable to the CEO, who is answerable to the board, who is answerable to the VC, and so on. And everybody is gunning for numbers this quarter, this quarter, this quarter. How do you engage in the long term? How do you get your foot in the door? So you go back to robocalling, right?
Well, robocalling is a bit different, but I look, I don't shy away from cold calling. It's still an effective work. It's not as effective as it used to be, but it sort of made a comeback during COVID. But I would still put it up against most things in the environment that I'm talking about. If you're sort of looking at a shooting gallery where you're trying to sell, a monthly recurring app to stick on top of Salesforce, I'm not talking about that, right? We're not talking whack-a-mole. We're talking about real sales, right? So in that particular thing, first of all, you have to think about a blended pipeline, right? So blended in a couple of ways. Long-term closes, big and small, right? So some short-term small accounts, you can close them. I closed one account. I had a call with the guy in October, bim, bam, boom. We did the training but it was a small, nice bite size. It was great for them, great for me. I loved it, and it will continue a dialogue with this person and we'll do a lot of business. But it took me relatively low time to close, right? Again, as you said, I do have this advantage that when people go to LinkedIn, there's a bit of a reputation there, there's a bit of background. So I think the question is, having a blend of things that you're putting in your pipeline, having a blend of conversations that you're having, again, and understanding that some are, like marketing gets it, nurturing, it shouldn't be a foreign term to salespeople either. And then lastly, it goes back to what we touched on earlier, is really knowing your numbers. I know my numbers are 12, 6, and 1. I know roughly I'll close 1 out of every 4 in the current cycle. and I know roughly what each of those deals may be worth, right? Again, exactly no, but based on data and history, you can extrapolate. So now I just got to decide what kind of lifestyle I want to lead before and after COVID, and that dictates how many sales I make. But you'd be surprised how difficult it is to get not just salespeople. Salespeople don't surprise me, but their leadership, the ones that you mentioned, right? How hard it is to get them to focus on basic numbers and how they want to fudge the numbers because of their own inadequacies, not their salespeople's inadequacies. So, data is great, but you got to use data both ways. It's like, just like accountability, it's a two-way street.
So, what is the sales leadership missing, actually?
Some of them are missing experience. I wrote this article, I think, at the beginning, sometime around 2019 for the Canadian Business Quarterly. And the gist of it was that we're heading for sort of this perfect storm because, you've had this long economic cycle that's sort of been taken care of by the flash crash, in March. But you had this long economic cycle that just naturally, like it wasn't gloom and doom, like they just don't go on forever. Eventually they have to contract so they can gain new energy, right? So, and I talked about the fact that most salespeople these days have not sold through a recession. And most managers have not managed through a recession, right? So, and I think COVID proved that out. People are running around in a panic for the first 2-3 months and, didn't have a clue where to start and so on.
Right.
So I think that sales management really needs to begin to think about embracing a process and holding their people accountable to the process, even if it involves sacrifice, because sometimes your best salespeople, you'll have that one superstar who doesn't adhere to the process and flaunts the fact that they don't adhere to the process. Now, if they didn't adhere to it and hit it, you could work with that, right? But generally, they tend to be morons and they flaunt it, right? So I think you have to have the guts to let that person go, because I will make a clear prediction here that people can push back on is I think unless things change in the next 10 years, sales will become a line item that's outsourced, much like the cloud has taken over your IT department.
And why do you say that?
Because if I could do it better outside at a lower cost, if I could put together an army of Tibors and sell your product better for you than you ever could, then why wouldn't you make a predictable line item, right? In your cost of goods sold, as opposed to running, a questionable organization. I mean, let's face it, according to CSOs we touched on earlier, roughly 55% of B2B salespeople make their quota, right?
Correct.
If you had a copier that was only spitting out copies 55% of the time, and somebody came along and says, I can give you copies 80% of the time, what would you do?
Yeah, it's sort of exactly the point I was trying to make in the beginning with the 5% conversion, by the way. So we have circled back to a very similar space. Yeah, exactly. Tell me.
I don't see the reason as being strictly the 5%. I see it being a whole shooting match.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it was just a starting point for the discussion, as I said. And
came full circle inadvertently.
Yeah. True. So coming back, why are we accepting this low productivity and saying this is the industry standard and we are fine?
Tradition, somebody needs to come along and disrupt it, and some people have, and there are some really interesting boutiques who are actually doing what I'm talking about, which is just taking that whole burden, much like the cloud organizations have taken a certain amount of burden off of companies who are looking to start up. What was the big barrier to startups in the past was the tech cost, right? So if you could take that burden off a startup company, especially at the startup range, but I think it'll go right up. If you could take the burden off them and have predictability, because that's the other thing is the lack of predictability, now the organization that's taking that on is going to have to do it right. And you might end up, in an interesting formula, but again, done right, which I'm not saying the formula is clear, but it's doable. Why wouldn't you? I mean, look at all the things, the example I give, and maybe it's a little bit exaggerated, but I think it's accurate, is if you look back 100 years ago, Henry Ford took everything in. He created the assembly line in order to make sure that they control everything A to Z, right? Yep. Whereas here we are 100 years later, and the only thing that Ford does is design and marketing. True. Everything else has been outsourced because they could do it better. So why wouldn't you do that with your sales team?
And how do you see the buyer reacting to this? Because for the buyer, they never cared about the product or the vendor. They were looking at their own outcome, right?
Right. So if they get the outcome, I always say to salespeople that contrary to what they tell you, start with the punchline and then work your way back into the joke, right? Because most business people that I've met, as long as what you're doing is ethical, moral, and legal, so I want to repeat that, ethical, moral, and legal, I don't think most buyers care how you get them there as long as it's legal, ethical, but most salespeople start with the means as opposed to the end. Whereas you should start with the end and then work your way back. That Tolstoy novel, go to the very last page and then work your way back.
This is great. Tibor, thank you so much. I really appreciate your making time right in the morning, and thank you very much.
Enjoy your day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers.
Meet Brish Van Vaidya, a certified sourcing, procurement, and source-to-pay leader with over 20 years of global experience across various industries and verticals. He has worked with global majors like Accenture, American Express, British Telecom, and is presently working with Uber. He has played roles in strategic sourcing, consulting, procurement, transformation, and procurement operations. Brish Van has been awarded Procurement Leader of the Year by Institute of Supply Management in 2018.
When we talk about the risk evaluation, it is the financial risk, it's the commercial risk, it's the technical risk, operational risk, legal risk. All these risks need to be considered when a particular deal is being, evaluated. I mean, just getting a price from someone which is better than other does not help. The concept of total cost of ownership is something which does come into play, which, a seller must know. And when it comes to the total cost of ownership, it is not just about what they are quoting makes a difference. A seller has to understand that there is a cost of transition also, right, from one supplier to another. So if they think that the buyer is buying something at $100 and I can give 5% benefit to him, they need to realize to get that 5%, it should not happen that the buyer has to spend additional 10% because there is a transition cost.
And finally, the Mumbai Dabbawalas. This needs a little background. The Mumbai Dabbawalas is a 118-year-old organization. They're engaged in the business of delivering homemade food to the working members of the family at their offices from the respective homes. Between 175,000 to 200,000 lunches get moved every day by an estimated 4,500 to 5,000 Dabbawalas, all with an extremely small nominal fee and with utmost punctuality. According to a recent survey, there is only one mistake in every 16 million deliveries. In 2001, Pawanji Agarwal carried out his PhD research in a study of logistics and supply chain management of Dabbawala in Mumbai. In 2010, Harvard Business School added the case study, the Dabbawala system, on-time delivery every time, to their compendium for its high level of service with a low cost and simple operating system. Here is Dr. Pawan Agarwal. Be amazed.
Prince Charles came to Mumbai, only 3 Indians invited friends, but when Prince Charles came to India, Mr. Jitendra Jain, he told Dabbawala, Mr. Dabbawala, Prince Charles want to visit you. Dabbawala told, I don't know who is Prince Charles. Oh, he is the King of London. Oh, King of London. I will allow him to visit, no problem. With 2 conditions. First condition, Prince Charles should come 11:22, 11:40 because Dabbawala free those time. That's why he should come that time. Second, we will not go to Prince Charles. Prince Charles should come to us. Where? Churchgate footpath. Friend, Mr. Jain asked, why you ask these conditions? What Dabbawala answered? Sir, he is a great king, but our 2 lakh customers are greater king. We cannot disturb the customer for Dabbawala's.
Well, that's a wrap for today. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay well and convert more.